Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street partner with businesses, organisations, unions and social democratic parties across the globe to develop community organising strategies and train leaders to build power from within their community. And in 2021, Dunn Street will continue to work with folks that want to share their stories, inspire others, take action and give hope and organise communities for change. To find out how you can partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. Socially Democratic is also presented to you by Morris Blackburn Lawyers. Are you passionate about working in the law and providing access to justice? Well, Morris Blackburn, Australia's leading plaintiff law firm, is looking for paralegals to join their class action team on a full-time 3-month fixed-term contract. Learn from a highly successful, collaborative and skilled team in an engaging culture and a supportive environment. The roles are based in Melbourne, and to apply, go to morrisblackburn.com.au/careers. And that's roles, plural, so more than one. Address again to apply is morrisblackburn.com.au/careers. Be a part of change and fight for fair. Apply now. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast that dives into the progressive issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. On today's episode, we are going to be joined by Labor's member in the Victorian Upper House for the Eastern region, Harriet Shing. You all know Harriet, we've had her on the show before. It's Pride Month has just come to an end and we thought we'd get Harriet on the show just to talk a bit about pride, equity, equality, social justice, civil rights, all of that kind of stuff. And just love having Harriet on just for a bit of a chat. One of my favourite guests. Listener of the week for this week comes from David from Northcote. And David says, this is a great podcast series and Stephen is a wonderful and informed conversationalist who brings out the very best in his guests from a wide variety of areas within the centre-left, both in Australia and abroad. One thing that really does impress me is the generous space he gives to women in the centre-left politics, with so many of our talented women activists and MPs appearing and shining. Well done, and a huge shout-out from this Victorian Labor Life member. David, thank you so much for your wonderful feedback. We appreciate that. And you can be like David and just go and leave us a rating and give us a review on our Apple Podcast app. If you use Apple Podcast, please leave us a rating and a review. And don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to your podcast, whatever app you listen to. And don't forget, for all of the updates, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Okay, let's get to today's episode. Okay, we are taping this one on a Monday morning. Oh, very organised this week, early recording of this week's podcast. And joining me on the line, long-time listener, long-time guest as well. I think this is her third or fourth time, but only for good reasons. The Labor's member for the Eastern region of the Victorian State Parliament in the Upper House, Harriet Shing, welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Everybody's favourite repeat customer. It's really lovely to be back, actually, and it's really nice to come back to familiar territory in being able to continue the conversation where we left off last time, which was no doubt something to do with bad television or animals or the state of play in Victorian, Australian or international politics. So as long as you haven't changed the menu, then I reckon we're good to go.
No, we have not at all.
Terrific.
Yes. Now, so it was the end, this month was Pride Month, and when we were planning out, our producer, Rebecca and I were working out who our guests were for sort of the month of June into July. We wanted to do one to mark this occasion. And we'd thought about a whole bunch of guests to get on. And then in the end, and I think Harriet might be sort of like, I don't know if you're sort of getting wheeled out as being the spokesperson from the Victorian Labor Party or in the Parliament and this kind of thing. I was like, I feel like I just don't really want to drag and poor old Harriet back out again. But at the same time, I thought, you're a good guest. People like you. Like, let's just get it back on the show again. And so here we are.
Well, if it's happenstance that I can tick a few diversity boxes and come back on the show, then good for me. But I am wheeled out a lot, actually. I am the village lesbian in the caucus, and I also tick a few other diversity boxes. And it's very easy to make light of it, and it's really easy to just feel like I should be making visits to Bunnings just to show up when all the other lesbians are there buying ingredients for a veggie box on the weekends. But it's actually really important to be visible, and it's really important to talk about diversity in our parliaments and in our representatives, because I think we've come a long way, particularly when it comes to women being represented in our parliaments to a much greater extent, at least on the Labor side of things. But we've got still a long way to go when it comes to all of the other groups and communities that are part of our everyday but don't necessarily have a seat at the table. And this is where the more we can talk about that, the more we can talk about intersectionality and what that looks like when we have two or more diversity communities or cohorts coming together, then the better off we are, I think.
And we're going to get to that a bit later in the show. I am going to ask you about the lack of diversity that we have both in Parliament and in media and in a whole bunch of other industries. And I thought about asking that question right there and then, but no, I'm going to stick to my schedule, goddammit. Look, the first thing I want to ask you is I want to spend a bit of time reflecting. So it's almost 5 years since the historic marriage equality survey was conducted. Was it a survey? It was a survey or a plebiscite?
It was a postal survey. Yeah, it wasn't a plebiscite. It wasn't a referendum. It wasn't really anything except an exercise in vitriol and begging. So, yeah, I think 5 years on, a lot of people are still really, really angry about that.
So that's to my point. If you were to do like a sort of roses and thorns kind of assessment of that campaign and where the movement has gone since then, what are your reflections? Now you've got some distance and time from that historic moment in.
Well, roses and thorns. It's wow, what a study in contrast, because it was an idea whose time had come, and it was a really important legislative change to enable LGBTIQA plus people to marry their partner. And it really, really hurt. It was an enormously damaging, distressing, and for many people traumatic period where, in the name of free speech, a disproportionately high amount of airtime was given to people who used their platform to spread vitriol and to create a platform to send messages that discrimination and vilification and harassment and violence against LGBTIQA plus people is somehow acceptable in the name of freedom of speech. And there were thousands of families who were in incredible turmoil, trying to support the parents and the children, the siblings and the relatives who they love through a period of enormous distress. And it was something which I don't think I'm alone in saying we felt like we had to beg for. We were asked a question. The whole of Australia was asked a question. Should marriage be allowed between two people rather than between a man and a woman? So should the Marriage Act be amended? And it was as though we had to ask the permission of the entire country to marry the person that we love. And when you think about the lives that LGBTIQA plus people already live in shadow and in shame and in the experience of discrimination, earning less, finding it difficult to access services, experiencing stigma, being harassed, having greater incidents of suicide and of self-harm, you can see how debates such as the marriage equality change and the process which sat underneath it were another really devastating stressor for those of us who were already under a considerable amount of pressure just because of the world in which we live.
From that stressful campaign, what can the LGBTQI plus movement take from it, though? What can they, in terms of the next fight? Because obviously, just because this happens doesn't mean the world's now a better place. It has improved, but there's a lot more work to do. What do you think were some of the, I guess this is a terrible phrase, but a silver linings in a big nasty shit cloud that you could take from it to then say, okay, right, well, tick that box, we've sorted that. Let's move on to the next area that we have to tackle.
I think in dismantling fear and prejudice, which is all too easy to nurture, where you don't actually have an experience of being around people who have normal, happy, functioning, very boring relationships and are of the same sex, to see that these things are in fact uncontroversial when you're talking about love and about marriage and about kids and about the everyday, and moving away from the vitriol is something that I think has taken the discussion about equal rights across the board to a much better place in people being able to come together to celebrate a wedding. And it is a really lovely social occasion to come together and to celebrate two people who are in love. And it's now the case that you can go along to a wedding and it's very commonplace to have a same-sex couple getting married, and particularly younger generations, no one's really batting an eyelid. And when you think about what that does to build on the earlier efforts of the civil rights movement, to firstly thinking about Mardi Gras, thinking about 40 years that we've come, thinking about pride marches, thinking about visibility and about access, everything from our local radio station, Joy FM, to the way in which forms have been changed so that it's not presumed that you are either partnered to or married to someone of the opposite sex, that you are a man or a woman, and that's it. So language is evolving and attitudes are evolving, and with every year that passes with generational change, we see that acceptance is growing such that most young people, I say the word young people like I'm a nana, and I'm almost a nana. But most young people, they actually don't care. And that's about the best position to be in, because it's no longer something which needs to be fought for, at least in the sense of superficial equality. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done behind the scenes, but the starting point is that it's actually no big deal at all. And we just have to keep building on that.
We're recording this episode on the anniversary of the Stonewall Riots in the West Village in New York. And I noted in the paper over the weekend that in Istanbul in Turkey there was the annual Pride Parade, but it was met with police firing tear gas on the marches and arresting over 20 people, and it turned quite violent. And apparently the current regime is trying to ban this event. Closer to home, there was a national study that found 1 out of 3 LGBTI kids hear homophobic language every single day in the classroom. And the study also showed that there was an alarming rate of teachers where they failed to intervene on this sort of stuff. That last stat kind of surprised me a bit. I just kind of thought, and to your point just before, where you said, the next generation of kids coming up, their attitudes towards each other and the way that they look at each other is far more accepting than, say, when I grew up as a kid growing up in country Victoria. When I heard that, I just didn't think that would be happening in the classroom anymore. I just thought the kids, would just be kind of, hey, we're all kind of the same, regardless.
Absolutely, and yeah, you're right. It's again, it's something which we're at a tipping point for. On the one hand, it's not a big deal, but on the other, where prejudice or vilification exists, the next step is to call it out. And that requires positive action from people who are witness to that. And that's really hard. And the survey that you've referred to, the Writing Themselves In survey and a national report, has demonstrated some really significant and devastating experiences for students who miss school because of feeling unsafe or insecure because of their gender. Days missed is disproportionately enormously high for trans women and trans men, for example, and experiences of casual discrimination in the learning environment is also really prolific. And this is why the sorts of achievements that we've made in the area of LGBTIQA plus rights are one point in a continuum. And when we think not just about Stonewall, not just about the data in the Writing Themselves In report, but when you cast your eye around the world and think to Poland with its LGBTIQ free zones, which were voluntarily signed up to by towns all around Poland. And you think about Hungary, which it's just recently passed laws that ban LGBTIQA plus content in schools or in kids' TV. To go to my original point, visibility is so important. And so when you push people's identities underground and you create shame around that and you create environments of self-censorship, that's where the impacts are lifelong and they're devastating in all of the ways that studies show us time and time again. So there is so much work to do, and around the world we see ripples and changes in the way in which African nations, Eastern European nations, and indeed many Asian countries still needing to work toward fundamental recognition of human rights as it relates to rainbow communities.
I read during the week, or maybe was it last week, the first active NFL player has come out. And reading a couple of articles on it, there was, I think it's Wade Davis, who's a former NFL player who came out after he retired, but has been, have you heard of this guy's name? He's been quite...
Surprisingly, given I know nothing about sport, I have indeed heard of him, yes.
Well, that's not entirely true. You are an expert on the 1990s Wallabies team. That surprised me.
Strange? Everyone's got something. Everyone's got something that they can wheel out. And if that means I talk about Wendell Sailor till the cows come home, then I suspect that there are some members, in fact, of the LGBTIQA plus community who could be more than happy to hear it.
When you're being very bashful when you say everyone's got something. You've got more than just one or two, I will point out. But, you know...
No, I just wheel them out very, very regularly. And so therefore you think that my passing knowledge of the Red Sox and the Wallabies and what's happened in Nanaimo and the curling tournaments of the early 2000s means that I know about all sport. I'll watch the Olympics. I'll be there. I'll be there on my couch eating probably very high carbohydrate food while I watch very lean people who haven't eaten any carbs do their best on the javelin field or whatever it is that you call it these days. And it'll be great, but that's about all I've got for you.
Okay. They still call it the javelin field.
Pitch? Is it a pitch?
No, because it's field, like it's track and field, and that's a field event. So it's on.
No, but do you do discus on a field? Shot put. See?
Both discus and shot put are done from the same area on the field of the track.
Come to socially democratic. Come for the political discussion. Stay for the completely uninformed sports trivia.
Yeah, and you can tell I was a track guy, not a field guy. No idea. Never walked into the middle bit of the track. Just ran around it all the time. That was me.
Yeah, I was a library guy.
Good.
I can't help you.
Okay, back to the questions. Yes, so Wade Davis, former NFL player, was speaking on the issue during the week and saying that, this language of coming out has poor connotations on the community in a sense that it's sort of, we're saying that our folk have something to hide, like we're monsters, I'm quoting him, we're monsters in a closet. But the reality is what it's true is that the world is acting like monsters towards us, and we need to flip that, and we need to start to use terms like, we're inviting people in. No matter how profound he said that this moment is for this player to come out, which is fantastic. There's a hell of a lot more we need to do, and it has to fall on to the organisations to do more to create a better environment. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on what Wade Davis was talking about there.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, the pressure that sports players in particular feel to conform with the idea that you are exactly the same as everyone else. And I think it's the tribal almost bond that happens in a team environment is something which brings everyone together, but which also creates opponents of anyone who's not part of that group. And this is where I can understand very much where he's coming from in the conversation that happens within a team environment, and then more broadly around accepting difference in people. And when you think about a sports team and the idea that you have to be able to trust implicitly every single one of your teammates to be there for you, you can understand his anxiety and the fear and the shame in the prospect of being different to everyone who counts on him to be someone very specific in that team-based environment. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why it is so very hard for athletes and indeed players from any different code to come out. It's incredibly difficult because of the culture that exists around sport, because of this persistent idea that particularly for gay men, that if you are if you're gay or if you're bi, if you're non-binary, then in fact you must be weak, that you must have these, and I'm very much using inverted commas here, these feminine characteristics that make you unreliable. And in many ways that speaks to some really entrenched ideas of misogyny, but in other ways it speaks to just how pervasive this culture is around what we expect of our sports players. We want macho, completely ripped individuals who can, suck down a Gatorade and fling it over their head while they go back and score 10 tries. And there's no room for vulnerability in that. And that's what coming out is. It's vulnerability.
Mm. It appears to me that I think a lot of the heavy, and I want to get your thoughts on this because I could be completely way off, but I think there's a lot of heavy lifting being done in terms of the campaign for change coming from women in sport, both here in Australia and overseas. International football, the WNBA, more closer to home, the AFLW. There are more openly LGBTQIA plus, I know I completely stuffed up that acronym there, athletes and coaches. So people within leadership positions as well across the board. And there's a view out there that the success has happened because of an intentional strategy that the collective has been able to achieve more because they've worked together. Whereas in male team sports, there's a greater priority towards the interests of an individual. Like, you think about it in sort of like basketball, the brand of LeBron James is far more important than the team that he plays in. Whereas the strategy that's come from women in sport is that they go, well, no, we need to strategize and build our power together and achieve what we want to achieve. And that's why they've created a space to be a hell of a lot more successful. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But I think more broadly, this is how women work in a collective. And this is where you get very distinct differences of decision-making process everywhere from boardroom tables to sports fields because of the collaborative nature of work. And there is always a point to be made about division and about competition that exists no matter who you are and no matter what your gender. But I think there is a greater readiness to collaborate and to get beyond the description of a problem and into the inventive stage of resolving it together for women, including on the sports field. Again, to think about someone like Megan Rapinoe, who is just an extraordinary athlete and has really reshaped the the profile of soccer through the work that she has done, not just in her raw skill and ability, but to go back to the point you made about LeBron James and his brand. Megan Rapinoe's brand is one of being vocal and articulate and one of walking beside people as a leader rather than pulling them along or pushing them from behind. She is somebody who elevates the thoughts of so many people within marginalised communities, but does it in a really amenable way. And I'm not saying that she dilutes her message or dumbs it down, but I'm saying that she is somebody who is gifted with a voice that people listen to without being confronted by. And again, in our AFLW code, the idea of inclusion and diversity is much more pronounced in AFLW than it is in the men's code. And again, I think it's for the same reasons. And this is where I think perhaps we've got a long way to go in making sure that we can broaden that inclusion across all parts of a code and to make sure that we are demonstrably equitable in showing people whose lives are different but no less worthy than our own.
So then bringing it closer to the work that you do, let's talk about it in politics then, because now in the Victorian State Parliament, as you referred to yourself before as what do you call yourself, the village lesbian?
I'm the village lesbian. No, that's but I mean, and I don't want to diminish it. I'm the first out woman in the Victorian Parliament.
Okay. I mean, that's insane. How many members of Parliament are there? There's 88 in the lower house, and there's how many in the upper house? 50 odd. One out of over 130 is nuts.
But that's not even 130. So it's actually across all of the parliaments that have ever existed in Victoria. There's only been one out woman, and that's not to say that there hasn't been a number of lesbians. There are LGBTQIA plus people in Parliament, and the reality doesn't change, but the disclosure is the important part of this. And that's why, again, and I joke about being wheeled out to talk about these things, but it's also it's a responsibility that I take really seriously, because it's incredibly hard to think about being brave if you don't have any point of reference. And I know that just in the course of doing what I do and in the work that I did as the Safe Schools Ambassador in the last Parliament and as the Parliamentary Secretary for Equality, being visible then emboldens other people to talk about their own diversity and to not be held back by that from seeking a career trajectory or an interest or a hobby, or to undertake certain educational opportunities to be themselves, and that's actually really important. I think that's as much part of the substantive output of good government as anything else.
I don't expect the Liberal Party to lift a finger to try and address this problem, but certainly the Labor Party has, in terms of diversity on a gender balance, has done a lot of work over the last 10, 15, 20 years with quotas as a part of a broader solution. Is that something that we need to start to talk about within the party when it comes to diversity? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting you should say you should talk about diversity in the context of the Liberal Party. Andrew Alexander was, in fact, the first out man in the Victorian Parliament. The circumstances around his outing, I think, were not of his own choosing, but he is a really proud gay man and somebody who isn't afraid of being visible, and that's an important thing to recognise and to acknowledge. The broader question of diversity is one which I think needs to be asked and needs to be discussed. And I think through the values that we have as Labor members, as progressive thinkers, even if you're not a member of a political party, talking about those individual freedoms and rights that sit very much within a progressive lens, we need to talk about intersectionality. We need to talk about the presence in our parliaments, the visibility in our parliaments, not just of women, but moving beyond that. We have to get beyond this idea of representatives all being straight, white, neurotypical, middle class people who've come up through the rungs of quite specific career paths. We need to talk about disability. We need to engage and have represented people whose experience is one of diversity, and often diversity across a number of different areas, because that's only fair. It's only fair that we do better, not just by our constituents, but by the decisions which are taken in parliaments, which we know. We know this from experiences around the world, as well as around boardroom tables beyond party politics, that decisions are better where they involve diverse views and diverse stakeholders and a range of different inputs.
If we look back on the affirmative action campaign within the party and learn from that, it appears to me that it has to be a marriage between the activist base of the party, but also the people that have control of the party from a power setting. It can't be just one or the other. And we had, for the International Women's Day episode, we had three, I gave up the mic to three women to come on and talk about it. And they were talking about that. Your colleague of yours, Natalie Hutchins, Liberty Sanger, and Julia Fox. And they were talking about affirmative action and the work that was done to achieve that. And I just think about that in terms of then trying to broaden out that diversity. Talking about it obviously is this great start, but in the end, I think we have to lay down some serious track that's going to actually be able to force the party into that work. Otherwise, it's going to be that scene in Life of Brian where they're just all sitting around talking about it. And then Judith comes in and says, Brian's been arrested. It's actually happening. And they go, well, let's call for an emergency meeting, and she walks out. Anyway.
We're really good at emergency meetings, aren't we? Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is again a really challenging space to be in, because striking that balance requires a movement away from the status quo, and it requires a movement away from history and culture and tradition and all of those things which many conservative commentators rely upon in order not to change. I think we have to be really honest about being vulnerable too in our party, because I think that progressive politics, and indeed inclusive politics, requires a conversation that eventually gets to the point of, well, who's actually going to give up their spot? Who from this dominant group of people with very specific characteristics is going to give up their spot in order to make for a more diverse group of people in positions of power? And this same conversation was had around affirmative action. It was a really difficult conversation. It was a conversation which I think required a lot of good faith, particularly from, again, these straight, white, neurotypical, non-disabled men from, quite specific backgrounds, acknowledging that, in fact, their opportunities were going to need to be diminished in order to create room and to create the space for affirmative action to operate. And so I think never being one to shy away from the practical challenges of a question like this, I think that we need to acknowledge firstly that we've got a long way to go. Yes, we've come a long way in affirmative action and in quotas, and the results do speak for themselves. But secondly, we've got a lot of work to do, and that requires goodwill, but it also requires tough conversations in achieving that balance between representation on the one hand and hopefully finding common ground with the power brokers who are also part of these decisions as parliamentary terms go on and as pre-selections are conducted, and as decisions are made about future directions for where we're heading as a party.
Broadening it out and thinking, this is almost the what do you see yourself in 5 years question, but where does the movement see itself in 5-10 years? What are the immediate urgent issues that need to be addressed right now that the movement is probably working away diligently, quietly in the background at the moment, but hasn't been brought to my attention. So enlighten me and the others that need enlightening on this podcast.
Absolutely. So progress in the space of LGBTIQA plus rights is something which is chipped away at, and it's been chipped away at for generations. And a lot of the work that happens isn't done as a street parade. It's not done as fireworks and fanfare and neon signs, as much as the stereotypes might invite us to think. It is done through sheer tenacity and stamina by people who want better outcomes in many cases than they themselves have experienced. Things such as the apology for historical convictions for homosexual sex, the apology given by Premier Daniel Andrews was momentous in its symbolism and its closure, and it is the sort of thing that culminates from years of work, of advocacy, of shared experience of trauma and of pain. And again, that vulnerability is one of the ways in which change is achieved. And from here, there's a lot of work going into changes and reforms to the Equal Opportunity Act to better align responsibilities of organisations to not discriminate against people on the basis of their gender or sexual orientation. There's a lot of work associated with the way that governments fund particular organisations and what the rights and obligations of those organisations are. So if a funding agreement, for example, provides funding and resourcing to enable prejudice and discrimination, then there's work that needs to be done to actually recognise that, but then also to change it. So we've been working over the past, since I was elected, so we established a number of task forces and working groups which have been systematically going through the statute book, going through the way in which health and human services are delivered, and also going through the education framework to talk about what exists within our system of state regulation and government to facilitate or to perpetuate discrimination, and then just working our way through getting rid of it. And this applies for everyone from children and young people right through to parents, to people in the forensic and justice systems, through to people in employment, accessing healthcare services, into retirement, access to aged care homes. These sorts of efforts are being maintained with stamina and with grace for the reason of a better right to an equitable life for so many people who deserve better, and so many people in the past who deserved better but didn't get it. So that's where the movement is heading. And again, there is no finish line. There is no finish line in the way that there isn't an end point for any civil rights movement, that there is a constant vigilance that's required to identify the need for change and to act upon it and to effect it, and to do this in a really collective way, and to continue that work and to be inclusive. And that's one of the reasons why banding together is so important, understanding where and how all of the bits of the rainbow flag come together and how that fits with other causes, other civil rights movements that also require and indeed deserve our support and our collective efforts as well.
So what I'm hearing from you here is it's more than just changing your company's logo on Instagram to the rainbow flag. I thought that was enough.
No, that's it really. I think if you've done that, you're all right.
Okay. Oh,
no, I don't. That was about to be a particularly short segment. Yeah, it is. And this is where the pink dollar, and I get really stroppy about this, and I suspect that you were quite prepared to poke the bear at this point in the interview, but the pink dollar is something which, to anyone who's wondering what it's about, is that every June we see companies globally add particular images to their advertising, design particular products, spruik particular services, and do this in the name of celebrating Pride Month. And that's all fine, and that's well and good. And you probably see a lot of this on your Facebook feed around this time of the year, or on your socials, or in the newspapers. What happens in the other 11 months of the year, though, is that often companies who have been doing the right thing all the way up to Christmas in the week before decide that, you know, Christmas Day arrives, they've been good, they deserve all of the presents, and then they can go back to being recalcitrant for the rest of the year. And corporate social responsibility it's come a long way. It's been recognised as one of the important pillars of acting in shareholders' and stakeholders' interests. But it has to be more than a token effort. And for too many companies, it is a token effort. And it's done in order to be able to humble brag through an audience which I think in many instances is underestimated by these companies. Having said that, lesbians do still buy Subarus all year round, so I will forgive them that particular focus on a couple of women going to buy a sports wagon that's been running just this month. But in all seriousness, there's a lot of work that has to be done, and it's not just so that you can stand up and say, well, some of my best friends are rainbow folk, and therefore I'm going to buy myself a Pepsi and raise a toast to them.
You mentioned also the diversity that exists within the I guess the Rainbow Coalition. I have over the years, you know, talking to friends, gay, lesbian, bi friends, and I've heard about a lot of sort of inter-rainbow kind of aggression that goes on in social media and all that kind of stuff, which is you don't want to hear about that. You don't want to know about that. And I can imagine that any movement that has diversity within it, it's hard to keep everyone in the tent. It's hard to keep everyone happy. It's hard to, articulate a shared purpose and a common goal. I feel I'm keen to get your thoughts on this right now. Just talking to some friends before today's episode, I feel like the movement's more unified today than ever. Would that be?
Yes and no, she says, as a typical politician. In many ways, yes. The progress that was achieved collectively in the marriage equality debate has been really fortifying to many parts of the LGBTIQA plus communities, as has also been the case with developments to ban conversion therapy in Victoria, and apologies for historical convictions, alongside changes to births, deaths and marriage certificate documentation. But what we have also seen is a rise in the trans exclusionary radical feminist, the TERF, which is the acronym for that. Lesbians who believe, in fact, that, and they're not just lesbians, the exclusionary fabric is wide-ranging, that trans women aren't women, that in fact they cannot have the experience of being a woman and understand the discrimination and the challenges that exist with that, and that therefore they dilute the cause, for want of a better term, by being considered part of women's culture. I fundamentally disagree with that. Trans women are women, and I will never believe or say anything else. The other thing I think that we have to work on in being inclusive is understanding how different cultures appreciate and understand diversity. So within Indigenous culture, for example, First Nations culture has brother boys and sister girls, and there's a very different understanding of gender and of the way in which trans folk are accepted as part of these communities. And again, when you think about overlaying these ideas of being marginalised, there's a whole lot of work to do to make sure that recognition occurs for all facets of people who have those intersectional characteristics and experiences. So we have a whole lot of challenges, I think, as communities, and I don't speak for the other parts of the communities. of which I am one part. This is just my take on it and my perception of it. But the experiences for people who are of mixed race, who are of regional or rural backgrounds, who are aged and elderly, who are in our justice system, who exist within a variety of different frameworks that make things more complex to understand and to advocate for, are no less deserving of the rights to equity and to equality and to dignity. But the answers about how to achieve that for them are often much more intricate. So that's where it's hard work, but it's really deserving, really important work. And it's work that we as a collective need to undertake on behalf of everyone, to make sure that everyone, no matter what their circumstances, has the right to live and be recognised and loved for exactly who they are.
Just while I've got you, changing the topic only so slightly, but keeping it in state politics. Obviously, the boss, Daniel Andrews, returns today back to work.
I thought you were saying meaning Bruce Springsteen for a second there.
No. First of all, great to have him back. Good job, James Merlino, whilst he was away. What's the focus for the Victorian government because I don't think Parliament's sitting for a couple of weeks now.
We have the winter break on now, but contrary to popular belief, Parliament is not where the majority of work gets done. The majority of work is done in our communities and with the people who we've been elected to represent. So there will be some people who will have a break, as occurs throughout the year, but there will be many others, and I'm in the mix with that, who work straight through. The Premier is back and firing on all 51 cylinders. He has come back to, I think, a media environment which is largely unchanged from the one that he left. And the phrase used, I think, by Paul Keating in relation to dogs returning to their vomit does spring to mind. But he is approaching the return to work with the same vigour and determination and integrity that he always has. And this work will absolutely be focused on recovery from the pandemic, on the work that we need to do to get everyone vaccinated, and to keep the pressure up on the Commonwealth to deliver those vaccines, and also to deliver on its obligations in Section 51.9 of the Commonwealth Constitution for quarantine facilities. We also need to make sure that we're taking care of the most vulnerable in our state through implementation of the Mental Health Royal Commission's 67 recommendations. And there's a lot to do to make sure that we're protecting, again, and this is in our Labor DNA, protecting and recognising those who are most vulnerable. And this is where one of the centrepieces of our work, and specifically the $5.3 billion big build, is about providing tens of thousands of Victorians with the right housing for them, and with the biggest social and public housing build that the state's ever seen, while we also continue to really, as I was saying before, recognise individual cohorts, people fleeing family violence, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, people living with mental illness, single parents. These are the people who need and deserve the investment that comes through Labor governments, and these projects will do an awful lot to change a lot of lives. So we've got an economic recovery, we've got a social recovery, we've got huge infrastructure builds going on, everything from the Melbourne Metro. The work associated with that tunnel is nothing short of extraordinary. It is world class in terms of the technology that it's used, but then right out through to taking out level crossings and saving people 40 minutes each way on their daily commute, through to parks and playgrounds and new schools and dental vans. There's a huge and very ambitious agenda that we are continuing to smash our way through, and it's the sort of thing that is changing Victoria not just over one term, but changing it in a very permanent way.
Your electorate covers the eastern region of Victoria, which, as you and I have discussed on previous episodes, takes up Gippsland, which is where I was born and raised. I haven't been out there for a while. Mum's going to kill me. But how is Gippsland going anyway these days?
Oh man, we have been absolutely smashed in recent times. As I was saying to somebody not that long ago, we are one major event away from a full biblical experience. We've had not just prolonged drought, which devastated East Gippsland, but then bushfires off the back of that, and then the pandemic. And given the huge reliance on the visitor and tourist economy, all of those things shut down the recovery through, visitor numbers drying up overnight. The pandemic has been, it's been crippling, as it has for the entire state, but it's been particularly difficult given that we've got large-scale transition happening in and across and throughout Gippsland as well. So changes with Yallourn and the power station there, giving a 7-year notice period to shut up shop in 2028, followed by the huge storms and flooding events that took place all the way from South Gippsland through to the Bass Coast, up through the valley, and to West Gippsland, which cut a swathe through the landscape. Thousands, tens of thousands of trees just razed to the ground. It looks, from some of the aerial footage, like someone's just come in with a tornado and set it loose. And this is where also we've had cracking occur in the embankment at the Yallourn power station, which has caused 3 of the 4 units to have been turned off through safety measures while those repairs continue in earnest. And then back toward the Yarra Ranges, which is also part of Eastern Vic region, again, the devastating storms which caused just extraordinary and unprecedented damage, houses being cut in half by falling trees, hundreds without power, roads closed. There was a do not drink notice on for water in 3 parts of the Yarra Ranges for about 3 days. And the community has been nothing short of extraordinary. It has been the best possible example of collaboration in the worst of all possible circumstances. And everything from rolling out generators through to neighbours helping to cut trees to provide access through to houses, the SES units, the CFA and police, the Red Cross have all worked together along with the ADF, paramedics and so many others. It has been a colossally awful couple of years, but what we have seen in that is a tenacity that is testament to the sheer will of people to not just get through awful situations themselves, but to make sure that others do too.
Tough people in Gippsland.
Tough, close-knit, resourceful, private, honourable, proud. There are so many words that spring to mind, and it's then about partnerships. What do we do to make sure that as a government we are providing the support and the resources that are asked for by the community, rather than going in with a list of pre-approved items and saying, well, this is what you're going to get. That never works. We've seen from previous governments that it doesn't work, and we've also seen from previous governments that that transition doesn't work where it's anticipated to only take a term. This is where the challenges that, in particular, the Latrobe Valley and parts of East Gippsland in particular on transition away from native timber are really hard questions. And they're hard questions that will require many, many years in the answering and many resources to address. But that's that sort of commitment and that work should be undertaken by all governments, no matter what their colours.
Harriet Shing, it was absolutely brilliant to have you on the podcast today. Let me tell you.
Was it satisfactory?
That was brilliant. Honestly,
I don't even know what accent I was just doing then. It could have actually, you could have been in New Delhi. You could have been in the Latrobe Valley.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of Scottish people that live in the Latrobe Valley, including half my family.
There is so many people in the Latrobe Valley who are from the UK, also from Malta. We have a huge Maltese community, huge Polish community, German community, Italian community. All of these people with family connections to the very construction of the power stations. So yeah, massive diversity there as well. So you can always find a good eclectic meal whenever you need one. And for those who are looking for a Polish supermarket, there's great provisions to be found in Sale and then back toward the valley as well. You can't go wrong.
Very good. Well, love to see you. Thank you for coming on the show. Keep doing the great work that you're doing, both down in my old neck of the woods, but also on the Parliament as well. And we appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.